Good afternoon. This is Robert Walker with retirementhomes.com. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar, Getting the Sale, How to Convert a Senior Living Prospect into a Move-In. So I don't want to spend too much time on introductions, but I will just briefly introduce a little bit about what the session is, try to manage your expectations about what you're looking for, what I hope to be able to present to you, and then as well, hopefully at the end we'll do a recap. We'll have time for some questions and answers as well. So first, a little bit about retirementhomes.com. We are the world's most comprehensive cloud-based senior living directory. We do senior living marketing. We're a resource for both seniors and baby boomers. Essentially, in a nutshell, we send you leads. So we specialize in senior living communities. We fill beds there, but as well as vendors, whether you're selling to communities as well, that's what we do. We send leads and we fill beds. So that really dovetails in well with what we're talking about today. So why this webinar? Why, again, getting back to that, getting the sale, how to convert a senior living prospect into a move-in. So really what I aim to talk about today, and hopefully what you'll walk away taking, is as follows. The first point is prospects aren't enough. What do I mean by that? We talk a lot, and certainly, retirementhomes.com, we do a webinar every month, talk a lot about how to use digital marketing, online marketing, email marketing, social media marketing, content marketing, traditional advertising. All these tools can send you more leads and more prospects. That's fantastic, great, very important. However, if you don't have a sales mechanism in place that has an effective way to convert these prospects and leads into sales, unfortunately, you're only doing half the job, and unfortunately, the job that's not going to secure a commission. And so as a result, basically the lesson here is that how to take that lesson from the prospects and turn it into a sale. So I just got a message said that the screen wasn't visible. So hopefully it's visible now. Again, we'll scale back here at the front. Again, getting the sale, how to convert a senior living prospect into a move-in. A little bit about retirementhomes.com. As I said, right there it is. Okay, perfect. So I see it's visible now, so thank you for that. So again, that's a little bit about what we do. Why this webinar? So what is our goal here? Again, one prospect is not enough. Again, what that means is that we can send you 100 prospects a day. It's fantastic, but ultimately the onus has to be on the community itself, both frontline salespeople as well as marketing, management, administration, really across the whole board in terms of converting those prospects into sales. So I think we're probably all on the same page there. Second, of course, is competition. So many of you, of course, are in very tight competitive spaces. Some of you, I know many communities actually, even in small towns, you might have 2 or 3 different communities in small towns. They might not be 150-bed, CCRCs in the States or long-term care home in Canada, but nonetheless, that could be a very stiff competition. But that competition can also include more options such as home care. The competition might not be a private or public senior living community. It could be home care. It could be various other, perhaps a congregate living. So I think that having that understanding that competition can come in many forms and in many facets, I think can have us appreciate more appropriately the competitive landscape rather than simply thinking of it as that other retirement community down the street. It's that most people still want to live at home. Most people still opt to stay at home. Only a small minority end up moving into a retirement or nursing home or some kind of a memory care facility. So most will still stay at home. So that ultimately is the biggest competition. And of course, informed audience. That is a good thing. We want informed audiences. We want people who have an understanding of their options. At the same time, what that means is that perhaps the sales pitch that worked 15 or 20 years ago isn't necessarily going to fly anymore because people have Google, they have social media outlets, they have friends, they have resources, review sites like Yelp, certainly retirementhomes.com. People have a lot of different options. So simply providing them one that perhaps the community that's closest to them, that they knew when they drove by, to work every day for 30 years, that isn't necessarily going to be the default position anymore. There's going to be other options available to them. And then, of course, closing the sale. So it's not simply enough that, driving those prospects in and even getting them interested and cultivating them and really getting them up until that decision-making point, but ultimately closing the sale, getting that contract, first month's deposit, whatever it is, that ultimately is the challenge here, and hopefully that's something that we'll be able to improve upon at the end of this session. So here's a brief snapshot of today's agenda. So what do we hope to review? One, the sales presentation. Again, depending on your care type, depending on a lot of different factors, there could be a lot of variations there. But given a fairly standard overview, this is going to be a presentation and I think some different strategies which will help focus your sales efforts. That includes how to qualify your prospect. And of course, what that means is, not investing your time and energy on prospects which are not going to produce results. And really, there's two parts to that. One, of course, is on the marketing side. You want to be putting your marketing dollars and your marketing time towards prospects which will be sending you leads or sending you money and move-ins. At the same time, once they are prospects, at the same time, you want to be qualifying people who have the money, who are decision makers. In the same way that the sales process would be conducted in any other industry, in the same way that that has to be done here as well. Of course, how to build effective rapport, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what the difference is. Rapport isn't good enough. Likability isn't good enough. Certainly not in the senior living industry, and how that can be improved upon. How to create a sense of urgency. Of course, selling benefits and features and that difference there, and then closing and follow-up. And hopefully we'll have time for some review, as I said, in Q&A as well. So, excuse me. So here's a brief overview, as I mentioned, of the sales presentation, and again, why we'll get into this. So there's first impressions, there's qualifying the lead, establishing your credibility, the conversation itself, of course, the tour, asking for the sale, and follow-up. We're going to identify each one of those things and a couple more as well. So what I mean by first impressions, of course, even not necessarily someone walks into your residence, but rather even more fundamentally, and again, this is perhaps might be before the sales professional really takes the lead on this, but nonetheless, this is an important thing for you to do an audit, a sales audit of all your marketing materials, of your website, your radio ads, your TV ads, your newspaper ads, your internet ads, wherever your presence is. This is an important consideration. Last month's webinar, for those of you who are on, we were talking about the 10 cheapest and most effective ways to drive leads and prospects to your community. We talked about having a voice, the importance of having a voice. So if you're an independent living community in an environment which is, let's say, working class, so it's been sort of a working class, it's not an expensive community, but it's more of a no-frill type of a community. You want to have a voice. You want to have a sort of an image or a brand that's going to reflect that. At the same time, if you're more, if you're a retirement community in an upscale in a large city, you want to reflect that as well. And so again, understanding that and understanding who the audience is and selling to that, or even marketing to that before the sales process starts, isn't the most fundamental thing. And ultimately, while that may be outside of the responsibility of a frontline sales professional, certainly it would behoove them to encourage management or administration or marketing directors to evaluate that and do a full marketing audit, and certainly taking on that themselves, because it might be outside the job description, but ultimately it will give them a better chance of getting that sales commission. Qualifying the lead, of course, we talked about how important that is, and we'll talk a little bit about what that means in this context, establishing credibility, the conversation itself, the tour, asking for the sales follow-up. So the sales presentation, first impressions here. So one of the first impressions is asking what type of care is offered at your community. Now, it might be many. You might be a CCRC, continuing care retirement community in the United States. In Canada, you might be more of a different type of environment. But whatever it is, it's understanding that if you are selling to a particular care type, this is what people expect. Now, excuse me, if people are expecting an independent living community, and your television ads or your all of your sort of print materials on the face that you put out there is one of independent and smiling and having a glass of wine with dinner and playing tennis and then they come and it's completely incongruent with that, that's going to present a challenge for a sales professional, because the moment that someone comes into the community, they will say, whoa, this is not what I expected. This is not what you were selling me. This is very different. So again, that's something which, again, before the sales professional is even involved, that I think it would be very important for them to make sure that those expectations are managed beforehand. That's what I said there. So it's understanding the type of care offered. And really, it's not just type of care. It's the whole environment. It's the whole unique value proposition, how you are branding your community. And if that is not in touch, and if that really doesn't dovetail in with reality, that's going to present a very difficult situation. It's going to make the lives of everybody from the frontline salespeople, management, administration, you know, and if you're a not-for-profit, the board, it's going to make your lives more stressful. So you want to make sure that, again, you're managing those expectations, not just before someone walks in the door, but before they ever pick up the phone, before they ever really have any kind of meaningful interaction with your community there. So that's the first step. And again, I like this comic here, nursing home in a post-texting world, so everyone has this sort of carpal tunnel syndrome, and I think it reflects the type of environment we're facing. It's two things. One is that, you know, we're more engaged, we're more familiar, we're more tech savvy than ever, so people are going to be more familiar and they expect more and they have higher expectations. But second as well, that ultimately the same physical manifestations of aging and are going to be present, and I think that in that type of environment we're going to face challenges. And so what I mean by that, it could be accusations of neglect, things like that people are going to read about. So those type of impressions, people need to be familiar. You know, if you're talking about how independent living your community is, and you come in and it looks like, you know, people, very depressing sight, people are sitting in their wheelchairs looking out the window, it's going to be a tough sale. So that, again, predates the sales process, but nonetheless is an essential thing for a salesperson to be vested interest in. Qualifying. So what I mean by qualifying is as follows. In a nutshell, the person that you're talking to, are they a decision maker? Are they the decision maker, perhaps most importantly? Let me give an example. If you work at a memory care residence, I hate the word facility. I use it all the time myself inadvertently, call it the F word. It's the last word we want to be using to describe, but nonetheless, it's something I try to wean myself off, and so that's just sort of a bit of a sort of a thing we always need to be careful of, the language that we use. So in terms of qualifying, what I mean by that is that is the person that you're talking to, are they ultimately the decision maker, or are they going to have an impact on the decision maker? Someone comes in, they're a walk-in tour, they phone and they'd like to come in for a tour. You do the needs analysis, you do the whole process correctly, but you don't ask, in a sense, are you the decision maker here? You could have do the whole sales process, think you have it in the bag, and they say, you know what, my mom, you work in a memory care home. My mom, she's very ill, but you know what? I don't have power of attorney. My brother has power of attorney. My brother does not think she should be in a home in a million years. Oh, well, you might have made the sale, but that person is not going to be the decision maker. That person would give you a check tomorrow, but you know what? They don't have the right to do that. Or you know what? Maybe they do have the right to do that, but they don't have the money to do it. They're 100% sold, and they say, whoa, you're that much a month? I only have half that a month. So again, that's qualifying that for a couple different reasons. Again, I'm talking about how important it is to measure expectations and manage those expectations, as we talked about in the last slide. But second as well, you're saving your own time. We're talking about not just return on investment when we talk about expenditures, advertising, and staffing, but it's ROTI, return on time invested. Call it sweat equity. In other words, you spend an hour and a half, 2 hours, the phone call, the tour, the follow-up, only then to find out that this person you should have qualified in the first 10 minutes. You spent your time on something that perhaps would have been better spent elsewhere. So that's, from the perspective of just saving your own time and allowing you to spend that on more fruitful prospects, that's an important thing to do. Understanding features versus benefits. Again, features would be, our community is so bright. Look at that beautiful chandelier. Look at our beautiful dining hall. Look at this. We have a call button in the rooms. We have 24-hour nursing staff. We have all these beautiful things. But when it comes to question-based selling, which is ultimately what this is, it's important not to sell to that, but rather to benefits. In other words, why do I care about that? I can talk about how beautiful this community, look at the beautiful paint and the wallpapers and the ambiance, and the person will say to me, I have glaucoma, cataracts, I'm legally blind. Oh, so I'm talking about how beautiful, the well-appointed dining room is, but if that's irrelevant to them, then ultimately I'm shooting myself in the foot. So selling to that benefits can only be done if you first approach it from a question-based selling. In other words, what would be the most important thing to you in a community? What brings you here today? What are you most concerned about with the future? Those kind of open-ended questions. We're going to get into that in a moment. But understanding that is really the most preliminary important step before ever getting to to talking about the benefits, to the features rather. So talking about affordability again, as I mentioned as well, that is really an important consideration here because it may not necessarily be a comfortable conversation early on, but early on the conversation, it really should be mentioned, particularly if you are an expensive community, to ask something along the lines of, our fees are $7,500 per month, just to let you know, or were you familiar with that? Again, asking in a way, in however way that you're going to feel most comfortable or that's proven to be most effective, but make sure that that's out there, especially if you're not advertising those fees beforehand. And that's often a good idea, not to advertise those fees beforehand. Again, depends on the type of community. If you're more expensive, better not to advertise it and let people come in, become a little bit, get their interest piqued a little bit, and then find that out. So again, there's a balance there because if you are more expensive, people may not, that price difference may not be immediately apparent why that you're charging so much more, and they may opt to not simply come in at all for a tour if you're $7,500 and the guy down the street is $3,000, even though you might be completely incomparable. But nonetheless, they might never have stepped foot in the door, so that's one reason why you might not want to advertise it. At the same time, advertising it, or at least qualifying people early on, would allow those who don't have $7,500 to sort of self-select and get out of the pool sooner rather than later, saving both their time and yours. So I think it's a case-by-case situation, but you don't necessarily want to introduce the price immediately, but you also don't necessarily want to wait to the last step to do it as well. And again, there are a lot of ways to suss out affordability as well. What are your current budget? What are you currently spending? So if you're working at an assisted living or skilled nursing community, and you're talking to someone, their loved one is looking for their parent, ask what their current expenses are. How much? Oh, we have 24-hour care. Really? Okay, yes. And my mother lives, in a condo. Look it up. Is an expensive condo expensive? And plus maintenance fees, plus 24-hour care, plus the caregiver takes my mother to this thing 5 days a week. So you can crunch in your head that there probably are means, and there probably are spending perhaps close to that $7,500. So understanding these different sort of financial considerations will help you suss out affordability. So it's not necessarily simply asking, can you afford this? Because invariably, people don't want to spend more than they have to, and they might say, whoa, that's more than I thought. So try to suss out beforehand what they're spending, because they might be spending more than that now, and they might consider $7,500 to be a steal. So it's important to qualify that at some point. And then, of course, commitment to participate. And what that really means is, if someone's going to be calling you or coming in for a tour, it's very important, and I've certainly experienced this myself. People want to come in, I'm just here for 5 minutes, I just want to get a quick look through. And you say, you know what, it may not be worth your time to do that. It may not be if someone says, I want to take a look for 5 minutes. You say, it might be worth your time to say, you know what, I'm sorry, I don't feel comfortable showing you around for 5 minutes, because it's important, essential, that you get a full, comprehensive, really nuanced look of exactly what we do. And I'm concerned that if you only see this for 5 minutes, it's just not going to be an appropriate or an accurate image of what we really do and the type of care that we really provide here. So again, and that's the kind of environment where you're asking for a participation, saying, you know what, you'll need to block off at least half an hour, 45 minutes for the tour. But again, it's not just to participate the time block. It's asking them really, are they willing to engage with you? Are they combative? Are they really there because they want to find out more? Or are they there because somebody, their sibling asked them to look into it and they're just doing it begrudgingly, but they have no interest? So again, you need to approach it differently and really create the sales process differently for different types of prospects. Next, of course, is credibility in your phone. I'll talk about what that difference is and what likability versus trust is. And here's a Dilbert comic. Of course, everything important in business can be learned from Dilbert. It's my philosophy. So the pointy-haired boss is saying, Dilbert, I'd like you to accompany Alan on a sales call. He says, you'll explain how our product works with their current system. Alan will crack jokes and collect a huge commission. He says, it might sound unfair, but these are good jokes. Like, what can I do you for? So it's a joke. In other words, what that means, how I take from this in this context is really that nobody trusts salespeople. That's a given. Salespeople are about as popular between mold and real estate agents and lawyers and politicians. So it's not a popular profession. So especially what's most challenging in the senior living field is that you're not selling a widget, even a car, a house, or a computer, or a pen, whatever it is. Someone can always get it back. They can move out. They can, whatever it is, worst case scenario, they're out amount of money. But in the senior living field, whether you're independent, active living, golf community, memory care, whatever it is, you are selling a lifestyle in a way that is integral and intimately connected with the person. You could be selling a fancy condo or a house, but ultimately that's not connected to a person. Here, you're selling care. You're selling really the person's autumn years. So it's very different than any other type of sale. And this is why sort of simply having that likability is not enough. So what is likability? Likability is, oh, John was such a nice salesman. He got us coffee. He was so nice. He spent so much time with us. That's a very different question than, would you trust John to take care of your mother? Now, John may be a salesperson. He's not going to be taking care of your prospect's mother, but ultimately that's how they perceive it, because they might meet the director of care or the nurse or whatever her name is. They might meet some of the social workers or personal support workers during the tour, but ultimately the first point of contact and the most meaningful contact is the sales professional. So the question that, whether you're in marketing, wearing two hats, marketing and sales, or just in sales, or just in marketing, but really the question is not about, am I likable? Because certainly one would hope that you should be likable, try to build that rapport, try to be friendly, but most importantly, are you trustworthy? Would they put their loved one or themselves, again, depending on the type of care, under your trust, under your umbrella? And if the answer is no, then that, of course, is the most important obstacle to overcome. You could be likable, but it doesn't mean you necessarily would trust someone to take care of your mother when she's ill. So how do you develop these sort of things? Mirroring. We talked a couple months ago, I think it was 2 months ago, about communication strategies with seniors. So how to speak with seniors, how to mirror them. Again, this sounds sort of exploitative, but it isn't really, because it would be the same process with anyone. It really means that speaking the same way your prospect's speaking, but it's beyond simply, doing that, folding their arms like they do. It means when they ask a question, repeat what they say, and we'll get into talk about how to do active listening and how to do effective listening. Listening is different than simply hearing what they have to say. So it means empathetic. Someone's spilling their heart out, and I've certainly been in that situation. They're spilling their heart out. They're talking about things which are just so personal and sad, and they might be crying on your arms, talking about this horrible situation that they're in. Being likable is great. Trustworthy is essential. Fine. Mirroring means really speaking back to what they're saying. So you're telling me this, it's rephrasing it, it's saying it's back to them. And again, that's important when we talk about managing objections as well. It means being empathetic. It means listening and active listening as opposed to just hearing. Again, we'll get into that as well. But really, to take one lesson from this, what it means is that as a salesperson, people will invariably distrust you because they will see you as being financially driven, which to a degree, of course, you are, whether you're commissioned or not. Ultimately, if a community doesn't fill up, the community won't be viable, or your job will be in jeopardy. So that's why ultimately, in a sense, you are financially driven. But that does not necessarily, and of course the operative word there is necessarily, preclude you from being a trustworthy and credible caregiver for their loved one. And caregiver, of course, doesn't mean you are necessarily imparting the care, but it means that you are ultimately taking responsibility for it. So asking and listening. So in terms of what does that mean? So asking is more important than answering. What does that mean? You should not be speaking most of the time. Why is that? Most of the time you should be asking the questions and they should be answering. How does that make you feel? What kind of situation has that been? How hard has that been for your family? What kind of challenges have you faced? Where do you see that going? When did this start? What would you like to see? These sort of questions will help qualify, because it helps understand everything from their financial situation to really their sort of pain points, what is bringing them in today. But really, it's not about you asking the questions for the sake of asking questions. It's asking questions for two reasons. One, so it allows you to be more empathetic, it allows you to be more credible, it allows you to be more trustworthy, but also it allows you to sell specifically to what they answer. In other words, if you ask, you've done some pre-qualifying, the prospects called you, it's about themselves, and they say, you know what, you work in an independent living community, you do some assisted living as well, and your prospect, she's a 79-year-old woman, she says, I have been, I'm terrible, I have vertigo, I've fallen a number of times, a few months ago I fell, I broke my hip, scared my children, I really don't want to live in a retirement home, but you know what, I just can't bear my children. They're just not sleeping at night. They're so scared of what's going to happen to me if I fall at home and no one's going to see me. So asking follow-up questions to that, and again, this will relate to how to create a sense of urgency, but asking follow-up questions to that will be imperative, such as, if you stayed at home and, God forbid, something happened to you, how would you feel? Not just how would you feel the physical pain, how would you feel about when your children found out? How would you feel about sort of leaving them in that state of shock and question and frustration? If something happened to you and you fell and you weren't able to get to a phone for 12 hours, how would you physically feel? How would you? So these are the sort of questions that could be asked about that. They sound almost leading, and some of them might be leading, but not necessarily, because it allows somebody, you're almost being, in one shot, you're being a therapist, a salesperson, a psychologist, really all in one shot. And so asking your prospect those type of questions, again, depending on the type of care type and all of that. Another example might be someone's looking for their father. He has some kind of cognitive or other physical impairment, and he lives on his own, but Sally, his daughter, is very concerned about him. And you would ask Sally, if something happened to your father and he was living at home and it was, even 5 or 6 hours overnight that happened to him, how would you feel about that? Sounds like a silly question. Well, of course she's not going to be happy about it, but allowing her to express that, again, two things. One, it's creating a sense of trust and a bond, because you really have to care about that. The old sort of adage or the old joke, sincerity is the hardest thing to fake, but the idea is that it shouldn't be faked. And I think that sometimes, you fake it till you make it, that you'll really see, even though these are people you don't know, you don't have a relationship with, it will be clear pretty quickly on that that you will start to have that empathy, and it won't be too difficult to create. But also selling to that, because Sally, that might be the most important thing to her, that she might think that, what, Dad almost never falls. He never falls. He falls once every 6 months. But you know what? If he falls at midnight and no one sees him till 7 o'clock in the morning when a nurse comes in or his friend comes in, that could be enough to cause some serious damage. So again, it allows you to sell more specifically to where your prospect's headspace is. And again, what the difference is between listening and hearing. Hearing is you hear your prospect answer, and you're already, while they're speaking, waiting for the next question to ask. That's hearing. That's not really listening. Listening, active listening, is really hearing what they have to say, and really it's almost counterintuitive, but actually listen to what they're saying and engage with it and ask them a question afterwards that genuinely came as a result of listening to them. Let me say that again. So what that means, hearing, is having Sally talk about her dad and how ill he is, and talking about all this, and you're thinking, well, you know what? This would be a great time to tell her that we have 24-hour care or a call button. And you're waiting for her to finish. You're waiting for her to finish. You're waiting for her to finish. And you say, well, Sally, we have a call button that, should your dad, or, maybe a call button, something on the wrist, something that, can help mitigate that. So that's great, and it is. But at the same time, although you're thinking in a linear pattern that, wow, this person's going to fall, and this lady, Sally's so concerned about her dad falling, and that our community has this and we can solve that, but she's not thinking in such linear terms. All she's thinking about, she's approaching it really in the same way, when someone buys a home, it's primarily an emotional decision here. So you can talk about these different, again, that ties in as well to features versus benefits. The feature is, we have a call button, and you're bridging it to, well, your dad falls and he can use that. But really what she's more looking for is the empathy and that there, but also perhaps more fundamentally asking follow-up questions, because you know what she might say? She might say, my dad has a sort of one of the bracelets now, the little call bells there, and you know what? Every time he uses that, every time he falls, he presses it, it works, but it takes an hour, or he's so weak from the fall that he can barely speak. Or that, he's in a state of shock, he forgot about it. So asking a question after she talks about that, say, oh my gosh, that must be terrible on you. What have you, what kind of solutions have you guys tried to find? Have you tried the little call bells, call buttons? Have you tried people calling? It's a genuine question. It's a real honest interaction with the prospect, and I think that way, again, two things. One, you're going to be able to achieve that empathy a lot easier, but second, you're going to be able to sell easier, because you're understanding, because she might say, oh, we've tried the call bells, oh, they don't work. They don't work at all. Dad lives in a condo, there's no reception, or whatever the reason is. if she says that, that's saved you from presenting something as a feature or a benefit and just being shot at. Practice listening. So this kind of listening doesn't come naturally, doesn't come easy, and it is difficult. Practice it. Ask questions, Google it, watch webinars, listen to sessions. It's important to, and again, even in your head, ask yourself, write down, the 5 most important or the 5 most common sort of scenarios that you're presented with and how you would approach it, active listening versus just sort of, waiting for them to finish so you can preempt and say, oh, well, that reminds me, we have this feature. So that's an important consideration and distinction. And of course, when we're talking about question-based selling, it's about asking open-ended questions. So it's not asking, it could be closed-ended. In other words, she's talking about, Sally's talking about A, B, and C and these different challenges she has, and you might be able to say, Sally, if we were able to provide the 24-hour care that your dad's looking for in an environment where if he falls, we would know within 10 minutes and an active and healthy lifestyle, would that be important to you? Yes. Yes, it would be. So that's not, it's leading, but it's not dishonest in the sense that it's helping your prospect prioritize and itemize her priorities. And understanding that will allow you to sell better, and it'll also allow her to understand how she can really place her priorities in the context of your community. So asking that question, that's more of an exception, but typically open-ended questions would be more important. So the sales presentation, the tour, and again, you see that sort of morbid picture there, retirement home shaped, of course, like a coffin, and this really is dealing with the perceptions. And this really also, I think, dovetails in well with making sure that you're managing the expectations of your prospects before they come in, because a significant number of your prospects, before they ever come in the door, whether they're looking for themselves or whether they're thinking of your community for the loved one, whether you're a 65-year-old sort of age range and people are playing golf all day and they're healthy and they're active, doesn't matter. A lot of people will still think of your community as simply a funeral parlor or as sort of a funeral home waiting room. So it's important to understand those, not just objections, but that kind of mental headspace long before anyone ever steps in the door. So we talked about the type of care. So if you present one type of care, let's say you are an independent living community, and let's say that 90% of your residents have a certain physical and cognitive abilities, and they're, they're not 100% physically or cognitively perfect, but you know what? They're in pretty good shape. And let's say 10% of your residents don't. We talked about this in the past webinar, so understand what are the best and worst times for tours. Let's say that one of your residents, I've had this before, there was one resident who makes, sort of different sort of, for a lot of different reasons, was significantly, both physically, cognitively, much worse than everyone else. So this person was, in truth, an anomaly. This person was, in truth, an outlier. So if someone were to see them, they would be a little freaked out and say, whoa, my mom isn't there yet. That person's a lot worse than my mom. And they'd walk out, and they would probably say, you know what, your community is very nice, but you know what, my mom's not there yet. Maybe in a couple years if she gets really bad, or vice versa, right? Your community, most of the people are pretty advanced, but there's someone there who at least, perceived doesn't seem so bad, cognitively or physically, and someone will come in and say, well, you know what, I met Joan, she looks pretty good. My mom or dad is worse than that, so I don't really think that, I think my mom's too far gone for a place like this. So understanding that and understanding, again, that's qualifying beforehand. What is the type of care? Even if someone calls and says, I'd like to schedule a tour, don't just schedule a tour and say, great, see you then. Spend at least a few minutes on the phone with them. Who is it about? What are the major challenges? Obviously, where do they hear about you? What are they looking for? What's their current situation? Then when they come in, because if they say, if their loved one is in a situation that's either worse than most of your residents or better than most of your residents, try to schedule a time that, so they're going to be in an environment that reflects truly who your residents are, and it allows them to see their mother or father or whoever it is reflected in your residence. It's not misleading, again, if it reflects accurately. If it doesn't reflect, then I think that that's perhaps a bigger question to speak with your colleagues in management about sort of how to deal with those kind of environments. It could also be that's a problem of advertising, that you're simply reaching out to the wrong prospects. It could be. But again, it means that, what are the best times? If if there's a certain bingo time which is active, or if there are activities which are better, have tours for that. It may be that sometimes you just want to block off tours that just, that's just not the best time for residents. People will understand that. They'll almost respect you more for it. So I think having that distinction and that nuance there will serve you well. And again, talking about managing expectations is probably the most important theme of this whole sales process, managing expectations in the senior living field. Because if someone's expecting one thing, they see something else, that's going to be a problem. If you're selling to one thing and their loved one moves in and sees something else, that's going to be a problem as well. If they speak to you on the phone and see something else in person, and so on and so forth. So managing expectations is important from the get-go. Creating a sense of urgency. So when we talked about earlier, Sally, her dad was, had a propensity to fall and hurt himself, you would ask these types of questions. What would happen if blank, blank, blank? You would ask these types of questions. Now, again, is it exploitative? No. It's allowing them to think in the headspace. And you might think, well, that's still, you're still making them go to the worst place in their head. But ask yourself this. Whenever you sort of doubt, because what will invariably happen, I talk about managing expectations. How many of you have been in a situation where a prospect comes into your community, or they call, or they come in for a walk-in tour, whatever it is, and they will tell you, I'm not here to buy, I'm not so interested, I'm just looking. I'm not, not urgent, or not for a while, whatever it is, in some way or form. I imagine that probably 90% of you this has happened to, because, who wants, you walk into a car dealership, you're just looking. Last thing you want is some aggressive salesperson just, to sort of come at you like a moth to a, porch light and flutter around you for an hour and a half. All you're doing is looking. So they're trying to manage your expectations to say, you know what, Mr. Salesperson or Mrs. Salesperson, I'm just here looking. Nothing's really urgent. So that's, of course, what they're trying to do, and, important for them to do that for their own reasons, the same way that we would do it if we were going into that environment. At the same time, ask yourself this, and ask this every single time you have that doubt. Why did they come in? Why did they come in on a snowy and cold and rainy and gross day if they're not looking? They're looking, and they're looking seriously. They may want to manage your expectations and tell you that they're not, but something made them come in. Or it's a beautiful day, and they came in, they spent the time, or whatever it is, somebody made time out of their day to spend X number of hours with you. They're serious. Now, that doesn't mean it's a guaranteed sale, of course. It doesn't mean that they will always be a qualified prospect. But generally speaking, when you ask, something made them come in today and spend time here, it means they're more serious than perhaps they're willing to let on. And I think in that sense, you sort of have to hold your ground. You have to understand that, again, I think just sort of almost remind ourselves that these people are here because they want to be here. These people are here because something is pushing them to walk in those doors. They're not coming here because they have nothing better to do with their time. They might. Some might do that. But generally speaking, they're here because they see a need. They see a pressure. They see a problem. They see something that needs to be resolved. And I think that is the most effective way to help recognize that sense of urgency and sell to that sense of urgency. It's not necessarily about telling them the worst case scenario, what's going to happen if you do this, everything's going to be horrible. Not necessarily about that. And in fact, it's primarily not about that. Rather, it's about selling what their needs are, what made them come in, and focusing in on that. My mom, she wanders, she has dementia, she wanders all the time. She's going to get, God forbid, hit by a car. Whoa, that's what you're selling to. It's understanding the biggest 1 or 2 or 3 reasons someone's walked in the door and selling to that. Next, of course, managing objections. Now, of course, in theory, in a perfect world, what you've done is qualified the prospect beforehand. So long before they've ever stepped foot in the door or that you've ever really engaged in that kind of a high-level interaction with them, you've already figured out what their objections would be to sort of preempt it. But that's in a perfect world. Theoretically, there will always be objections. We'll get into what exactly that means. So they say, this home is too expensive. This home is too old. Well, I mean, whatever it is, there's 100 million different reasons that someone could say, and it could be this home or your staff or whatever the reason it's too far. There'll always be some reason. There'll always be some objection. Otherwise, they would give you a deposit right there. So how do you manage those expectations? Now, again, the reason I say manage as opposed to addressing objections, because those are really two different things. Addressing an objection would be, she said, your home is too far. I don't want to live here because all my friends live 20 minutes away. You could say, well, you could hop on the highway. That's only during rush hour. If you, between 10 and 4 evenings or weekends, it's going to be 10 minutes away. Now, that's a good answer, and it does address their objection. But the problem with that is that there's a very good chance, in fact, probably better of a chance than not, that her objection is not necessarily just about that. That might be just a smoke screen, or it might be that, but more fundamentally, there are other bigger questions. So that's where sort of addressing objection, well, you say this is an objection, well, that. But additionally as well, it presents sort of a combative atmosphere, which is not going to necessarily be conducive. Because even if you sort of win the argument, they're not necessarily going to move in or move their loved one in there. So how do you do that? You listen to it. You honestly, and again, that's where the active listening, you honestly listen and engage with what the question is. They say, this home is too far. All my friends, I'm 75 years old. I don't have a car. I take the bus. All my friends live 20 minutes away. This home is too far. Too far to visit my friends. So what you do is you listen. You actually listen. You engage with it. You understand what she's saying. You repeat back. This is where the sort of the mirroring, almost the sort of psychological aspect comes in. You repeat back and say, so Mrs. Smith, what you're saying is, if I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying that we are located too far away from blank location where your friends live, and it would be difficult to, it would take a long time for you to go and visit them. Am I understanding you correctly? Yes. Okay. So you've repeated that. Right off the bat, you were helping to establish that credibility, that rapport, that trustworthiness. Next, you want to explore a little bit. How often, how often do you see your friends? Do you, do they often come here? Why would that, why would that be an objection for you? How would that make you feel? So again, it's not necessarily about doing it in a way that will help you address it, although part of it will, because she might see your friends once a month. They might have a bridge night once a month. So is that really a reason to cancel out this community based on its location? No, probably not, if it's once a month. Or who knows, if they have a rapid transit, or, who knows, whatever it is, there may be a way around it. But so simply asking these questions, real questions, not just leading questions, will help you achieve one of two things. One, it'll make you be empathetic and trustworthy, and you're listening, and will help you close a sale in that sense. But also, it might have her say, you know what, the truth is we really only get together once a month for a bridge, and I could probably, get a ride. But even once a month, even if it takes me an hour, that's only once a month. And also, we don't do it in the wintertime. Whatever reason, it helps you understand, because then the next step is to address it. In this kind of a situation, Mrs. Smith, it's true, we are 20 minutes away, from that area. I think that certainly, we can make things work. There are taxis nearby. There's public transit that is rapid on the weekends. Whatever it is, it helps to address it as well, because you're not just shooting out these objections. You've asked meaningful questions, and you've asked her, Mrs. Smith, personal, real, honest questions, which has her thinking of you in a different headspace, not as the Dilbert cartoon as a sales guy out looking for a commission, but as someone who's actually looking to solve a problem here. And then you ask, would that, if we could be in a situation where, it wouldn't be too hard for you to get there, would that be a good situation for you? Yes, it's asking for her to act. In other words, asking for her to reflect on that. Or she might say, no, you know what, that's still a problem. Okay, how can we address this? How can we approach this? How can we think about this differently? How can we reframe this? And that really then leads to bridging, where the bridging might be, you say, Mrs. Smith, it's true. Once a month, it is going to be, it's going to be a bit of a commute to go see your friends once a month for bridge. It's true, but in the other 29 or 30 days of the month, there's going to be so much incredible things happening here. We have tour buses into town. We have tennis, and we have bridge, and we have bingo, and we have walks, and we have movie night. We have all these things. You're going to want to see your friends, stay in touch with your friends, but you know what? You are going to have the time of your life here. It's bridging into something, in other words, because she might be thinking, I don't want to lose that connection, because I'm going into, where am I going? I'm going into a big coffin here. So the last thing I want to do is go into a coffin and lose my one meaningful connection with friends. And you're bridging it to saying, you know what, yes, it's going to be maybe perhaps a bit of a commute to go see your friends, but you know what, there's going to be an incredible social life here that you do not want to miss. So next step, asking for the sale and follow-up. So I think in the senior living space, and I'd be interested to know what you have to say. Again, we'll have some time hopefully for questions. So if you do have questions, you can raise your hand or in the toolbar to the right and actually ask your question. So I'd be interested to know what you have to say about this. My approach and our approach, the old adage, you may be familiar with that, always be closing ABC. And I think that this has its merit, but I think in the senior living space, given the, as I said, sort of the intimate nature of what you're selling, that you're not selling a cell phone. Someone, you could really do the hard sales pitch, buy it, it has all these features, has all these apps, okay, I'll do it. You're not selling that. You are selling someone's loved ones, and I think that a particular higher pressure tactic could be problematic and might not be as effective. I really don't, and certainly in my experience and the research that we've done, does not bear that out that it's going to be as effective as more of a consultative, question-based process. But again, happy to see what you have to say. It doesn't mean that you don't ask for the sale, you do. But it means, again, in certain situations, and we'll get into that, but it means that there has to be a lot more nuance to it. So the right way, I think, to ask for the sale in this kind of environment would be, you've been dealing with Frank for himself. He wants to move in. He and his wife, they're getting older. They're not so mobile anymore. They really, they're in their mid-80s. They know they want to be in a home. They're just dragging their feet. And you know this because you've consulted with them. You've asked questions with them. You know them at this point. I think that there is a point where you can say to Frank and his wife, you can say, Frank, we've spoken for the last 6 months. We've really been in touch, and we've walked through a lot of, I think, where you're coming from, a lot of the big challenges that you see, where your current living situation is now. I think this is the right decision for you. And you stop and you say that, and if you've done your job well, and again, if it really is right for him, he might say, you know what, you're right. You're right. Let's just do it. Because you know what? It's analysis paralysis. Someone might be saying it. They might be throwing different objections, and I'm sure we've all faced this issue and this issue and this issue. It's not really about those issues. They're looking for something to jump on, or perhaps that they just can't make a decision because they don't see the benefits. They say, well, maybe I should, but that's in a situation where it's saying, you know what? This is the right decision for you. But you can only say that if you've established if you have their trust. And again, that's through the consultative sales process, and of course, the root word there, consult. So it means that you're asking them questions because you really are interested, and also because it's the only way that you can understand what they're looking for. And with respect to follow-up, certainly I don't think there's anything wrong with following up the next day. Someone comes for a tour, you follow up. Hi, Jane, I just wanted to say how great it was to meet you, talk about your dad. If you have any other questions, please reach out to me. Just wanted to see what you thought. Again, that's fine. You can customize it however you want. There is an amount of follow-up that is appropriate and not appropriate. Always say when you're going to follow up. So if someone says, yeah, you know what, it was a great tour, I really liked it, or someone said, well, I was really worried by this. Wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that, because sometimes if you call them the next day versus 6 months ago or a week later, they've already in their head been stewing on something. They've already decided they're not interested because one little thing. Meanwhile, if you talk to them the next day, they might say, yeah, you know what, actually, Rob, I saw a lady. She was sitting in the corner and she was asleep. And it was just kind of depressing, and I don't want my dad to be. It looked like she was neglected. And you could say to her, well, actually, she was there for about 2 minutes. The other lady was going to her room to get her medication. Well, whatever it is, the objection is, you can address that. But if you've given it really more than a couple days, people are going to stew on that. And they're going to be looking for a reason not to do something because they're plagued by guilt. So if you give it a week and you follow up, by the time you've done that, Jane, she's already decided that she's not going to, because that person sitting in the corner, she was neglected. And if she's neglected, they probably abuse people. And if they abuse people, there's probably people who've been killed. Whatever it is, her mind will run and create these analogies, or not analogies, but these images, rather. And I think that that's why it's a very good reason to follow up the next day and regularly. So when you do follow up and you say, yeah, it was good, I liked it, I have to talk to my brother about it, But then you say, okay, great, you know what, I'll leave that with you. Certainly let me know if you have any more questions. In any case, I'll be touching base with you in about a week after that. You know, let me know if that's a problem, but otherwise I'll be touching base with you next Friday. So give specific times and dates that you'll be following up. You don't necessarily have to do the time, but certainly say, you know, I'll be following up with you that. Don't necessarily ask for their permission. Is that okay with you? Because they may often say, well, no. I mean, if they say, do not call me then, that's a different story. But if you say to somebody, you know, okay, great, you know, I'll leave that with you. You know how to reach me if you have any questions. But I'll touch base with you next Friday just to see if anything's changed. And invariably, 9 times out of 10, they'll say, okay, fine, no problem. So again, that's the importance of follow-up and appropriate follow-up. So that's it for today's presentation. You know, I wanted to, it's just about 10 to 3 now, so I want to leave time for some questions. So if you do have questions, just again, on the right-hand side in the toolbar there, you can enter and ask whatever you'd like. So we have one question here from Charles. Thank you, Charles. So what are the different parameters for selling to different care types? So I'm not sure exactly what you mean. Can you elaborate here, Charles, a little bit here? Okay. So let's just give Charles just a minute here. So I think what you may be asking is, in the sales process, when you're asking these consultative sales questions, if you're in an independent living community, or we call it active living versus memory care, so sort of two ends of the continuum of care, does that impact how you're asking questions? Oh, exactly. Okay, perfect. Great. So again, the question is, how are you asking questions in a memory care or in a CCRC versus an independent living community or a golf community? How is that going to impact it? And the question is, it's going to impact how you approach sense of urgency, but it's not going to impact how you ask questions, because ultimately something is making your prospect come in. In a CCRC, in a skilled nursing, in a memory care home, the prospect or their loved one more likely will be calling you not because they love you, but because they see a problem. And so there's a much, I think, more pressing need there that you can sell to. In, again, talking about a golf community in Scottsdale, Arizona, nobody has to move there. They want to move there because they want to. But you know what? That's a different approach. It's nonetheless asking them, you know, what aren't you happy with right now? What do you want to change about your life? You know, why do you want to sort of get out of the rat race? So it's the same questions are still important. It's still asking them the questions in a sense. Why did you come here today? Why did you pick up the phone and call me today? If you're not interested, you would not have come in today. Doesn't mean it's a guaranteed sale. Doesn't even necessarily mean it's qualified. But you have to be asking them questions that really circle around the question, why did you call? Why did you come here? It might be because my dad needs to be in a place like this, or it might be, you know what, I'm working, I'm stressed out, I need to get into the sun and just have a relaxing environment. But asking those questions is still imperative. Okay, so we have a couple more. Barb asks, can you share any creative follow-up suggestions with leads who have, 1, requested info but have not toured yet, and 2, have toured? So thank you, Barb. So I would suggest a couple things. So again, obviously not knowing the details there. So someone has requested info but hasn't come for a tour yet, and I think we've all had that suggestion. You've called them. I think that perhaps there might be, again, depending on what you've done already, there might be a couple different ways to approach it. There might be a way. So for example, one thing you might want to do is, based on what kind of qualifying process or conversation you've had on the phone, might not be a bad idea to stay in touch with them, not just simply, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, you know, I know we've been in touch. Do you want to come in? That's good. I think another approach might be, if they've talked about, again, whatever the parameters of the situation, an issue, or, again, whatever that sort of, you know, whatever that reason that they've called you in the first place, something made them call, you want to ask them and find something in the news, you know, have Google alerts, you know, or just, you know, sort of keep on, you know, Google alert is basically you can make sure Google, whenever the search terms that in your area, keyword in sort of a local news, you can have it sent right to you. So let's say something, again, talking about memory care, you know, oh, my mom is wandering, very concerned about that. So, you know, what if there's a story, make sure you have something like that in the news. So, you know, something comes up and you send it, or you call them and say, hi, wanted to call. Didn't know if you heard about this this lady who's wandered. Oh, you know, she was, you know, thankfully found, but wanted to let you know about that. You know, sort of, you know, we can chat a little bit. How's your mom doing? I think that's a good approach to ask, how are you doing? So it's not necessarily asking even just to say, hey, you know, have you come in? So it's I think, reframing it, Barb, from the sale to, hi, wanted to call, see how you're doing. see how you and Frank are doing, how you feeling, how's your mom doing? I know last time we spoke you said she was pretty aggressive with her caregiver. Whatever these questions are, I think turning it into more of a conversation, because if you're a salesperson, nobody wants to talk to a salesperson. But if you really are a trusted partner, again, whether depending on the type of care, they're going to be much more likely to come in because they'll say, actually, you know what? We've been in touch. We should come in, because you're not calling to say, hey, when do you want to come in for a tour? It's rather, how can we continue this conversation? Okay. So, yes, how's your search going? So Barb just wrote, yes, I like that. How's your search going? I would say that, but even more fundamentally, it's, how are you doing, right? I know when we spoke, you said that, that you were really, you were just getting really stressed at your house. You were finding your house too big and too messy, and you were getting frustrated and stressed out with all things. How are you coping with that? I mean, you've already asked those questions probably before. You want to continue that. So it's less about sort of, hey, how's the sales process? I mean, that is what you're asking, but I think it's more, at least on the face of it, it's asking about sort of about them. And I think that people are going to be more receptive to that. So, I'd certainly be curious to what your thoughts are there. All right, Jane asks, or says, we are an older, well-established community. There are an influx of new facilities in the area. How do we address the unspoken objections without talking about the competition? So I guess what you're saying, Jane, there is that you're an older community and that some newer communities have competitive advantages that you don't, in the same way that you would have that they don't. So people come in, they see that, but they're not necessarily saying it. So they're not saying, Jane, your community is very nice, but Cedar retirement home down the street, they're a lot nicer. Correct. Okay, perfect. So I think that's a good question. I think one of the most important things, and I think you've already addressing that, is to know your competition. Not just know the competition, but actually what's the competitive advantage. And that's why it's important to stay in touch with, you may be doing this already, prospects, even the prospects, even if they've already moved into a competitor's home, or they simply decided to put it off indefinitely, whatever it is, for two different reasons. One, maybe there's a chance the sale will turn, but even if there's no chance the sale is going to turn, let's say it's a done deal, they're happy there, whatever it is, understanding that will be important. So again, that's sort of a bit of a back end. So how are you going to then, prospects come into your community, you know for a fact, and let's just say you've done your research, you know that the other communities are better and they have better, as far as amenities come. You're an older community, you're established, you've been around for 50 years, but people come into your community and they say, yeah, it's nice, but you know what, the place down the street has a gym, has Wi-Fi, whatever it is, it's going to be appeal. How do you address those unspoken objections? I think one way to ask that would to bring it out into the fold. So I don't think you necessarily have to badmouth the community, but you can ask your prospects, where have you been looking so far? And I think that it's a couple things. Prospects are, I found, frequently initially a little bit uncomfortable to sort of talk about the competition in front of you. But I think if you ask that, it shows two things. One, it shows that you're not afraid of them looking. And in fact, what I've sometimes done is I've said, you know what, I encourage you, we're one community, you should check out this other one, you should check out this other one, and they might say, oh yeah, actually we have. And they wouldn't have said it, and then they said it, and it allows them sometimes, what I found is that sometimes if you position in the right way, you can have them raise their objections about those other communities too. This is, I think, if it's really sort of, if the stars are aligned, if you've really done it the right way. So in that kind of an environment, someone's sitting down with you, maybe, I don't know if they've already said they've been to another home, or you're just surmising that, or if, however you've identified that. But I think the one is to say, Mr. and Mrs. Miller, how long have you been looking so far? And they say, oh, we've been doing this for sort of off and on the last month or so, nothing terribly. And say, okay, are we the first community you visited? And they say, oh, no, we've been to Cedar retirement home down the street. Oh, you have? Okay, well, how did you find it? Oh, it was nice. It was very bright, very new. They had a nice gym. They had Wi-Fi. So again, so you're allowing them to do that. Oh, okay. So, so may I ask, so have you decided to go there? Oh, well, no, because, you know what, we like it, but, it's a little bit far, or it's a little bit whatever, because, so it allows people, because in the same sense, if they've already been there and they haven't yet decided there and they're coming to you, it means that you're still in the game. So I think that asking that line of questioning will allow them to articulate what they don't like about the other community. And as soon as someone articulates something about someone in another community, it's getting in their head. So it's a little bit sort of, again, it's sort of a bit of a, almost a teaching kind of a method, because sort of often if you teach something, the best way to learn something is by teaching it. So, if I were to teach you that, whatever it is, 1 + 1 = 2, the best way for you to remember that and to really engage that and to really is for you to teach that to someone else. And so, and really this is sort of talking about webinars. The best way, some of the best skills I have is by teaching these webinars. So in other words, it's by verbalizing it, it's by getting it out there. So I think that asking that type of question, framing it that way, one of the things that we'll do is have your prospects, it will make them actually verbalize what they don't like about Cedar Retirement Home down the street. Oh, so you've been there. Oh, so it has a nice, that's great to hear. What, so have you, so you've decided to go there? Oh, truth is we don't like this. Okay, fine. So that's going to help them identify that. So that's not necessarily addressing the objection to you. But I think that that's a good way, once they've actually said it. In other words, I think once it's important to actually have them speak it for two things, is that one, I don't know if it's necessarily appropriate for you to sort of, in general, criticize another community unless, unless your prospect says, you know what, they have a nice new gym, but I really didn't like this about them. You can talk to them about that. Not about, oh yeah, well, we have complaints all the time. Not necessarily about that, but about, we've really, I understand how important, I have heard that complaint before. We here, at ABC Retirement Committee, we work very hard to address this. Here's how we do it, and so on and so forth. So it's not really about critiquing the other guys, is talking about your competitive advantage in that sense. So it's asking them, A, to articulate their complaints about someone else. You're not asking that specifically, but you're allowing them to do that, which will then encourage them, allow you to ask more follow-up questions to that. And then invariably, it's a great bridge to ask about what the problems are or what the challenges are in your own communities, and say, I understand that's, that's been an issue for you. We certainly had that question. That's something we've tried to address here. They say, yeah, I see that. They say, but yeah, you know what? It was really nice. And you can ask them, how important do you consider a new gym to be? Oh, I consider it very important. Okay, so that's a good question. So then it allows them to articulate what their priorities are. Again, if you haven't done that already in terms of qualifying, but then what it allows you to do is prioritize. Well, you know what? It's true. They have a nicer gym. Newer gym than we do. Hopefully we'll be, upgrading ours in the next couple of years. But here's what we can do that I think that we can offer that they don't have, A, B, C, or D. So I think that in a sense, getting it from unspoken to spoken will allow you to address those challenges, or address those, in a sense, objections that your community doesn't have. So I think that's it for the questions we have today. So we're a little past 3, so we'll have to leave it there. But I want to thank everyone so much for participating. Again, the session will be sent out. This is being recorded. It will be sent out, both the slide deck and the recording. So if you're on the webinar, it will be sent to you. If not, my contact info is there, robert@retirementhomes.com. And please join us again next month in May for another webinar on marketing and sales senior living community. If you have any recommendations, have any thoughts, please contact me as well. Again, if you'd like any questions about how retirement homes can help drive new leads or sales to your community, please again contact me, robert@retirementhomes.com. Thank you so much for your time today, and have a great day.